to the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University in Montreal, a psychiatric facility with the best reputation in the country. More than half a century later, Diane still remembers what she saw then as if it were yesterday. Because when they got to the hospital door, her enthusiasm turned to horror.
When we got there, the place was just like a scene from One Flew Out of the Cuckoo's Nest. There were people banging their heads on the walls and droning, and my mother was sitting there completely drugged up. And even as a child, I knew that she wasn't right.
What they didn't know at the time, Ellen McIntosh and hundreds of others like her were unwitting guinea pigs in brutal psychiatric experiments that took place at the Allen Institute under the codename MKUltra. Massive drug regimens, enforced prolonged sleep, intensive electroshock, largely funded by the Canadian government and the American CIA. No consent was ever asked from the patients, and no explanation of the experiments was ever given to them. The MKUltra brainwashing project got its start in the early days of the Cold War, when some Canadian and American soldiers returning from the conflict in Korea expressed sympathy for their communist enemies. At a time of paranoia about the so-called Red Menace, the Americans believed the Soviets and Chinese might well have devised an effective brainwashing method, and the CIA was determined to crack it, as ex-CIA officer John Gittinger told the Fifth Estate in 1980.
So we were charged with rather an elaborate attempt to try to find out chemical, psychological, any kind of means that people could use to influence the behavior of other people.
But the CIA knew it could be politically difficult to fund brainwashing directly, so it set up a front company to do it, euphemistically called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology.
These are the days, and ours are the occasions.
And they found a prominent scholar doing related research in Montreal, the renowned psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron, co-founder of the World Psychiatric Association. Those who worked with Cameron called him domineering, and more.
He was an authoritarian, ruthless, power-hungry, nervous, tense, angry man. Not very nice.
And it is his mind, no less, which may destroy mankind.
Over the years, in addition to CIA funding, Dr. Cameron received Canadian government research grants worth well over $4 million today for experiments on what was called psychic driving and depatterning, attempts to erase negative memories from the human mind and replace them with new, positive ones. So it was that in 1962, a 23-year-old mother of two, Ellen McIntosh, was referred to Ewan Cameron for what she thought would be a time out from the pressures of motherhood and marriage. Depressed after the birth of her second child, her GP recommended Dr. Cameron. No one told her she would be part of a radical science project with a full menu of experimental treatments, shock, drugs like LSD, months of induced sleep with recordings bombarding her subconscious 24/7. After all that, Ellen McIntosh says she effectively became an infant again. In all, Ellen McIntosh spent 2 years at the Allen Institute, most of her memories erased like data on a hard drive. 5 decades later, the Government of Canada has been more deeply involved in all this than it wants to admit, with new secret settlements, shutting down lawsuits, and gag orders. And as you'll see after the break, it is not something they want you to know about. From 1950 until the mid-60s, Montreal's respected psychiatric facility, the Allen Memorial Institute, was the site of secret brainwashing experiments, funded by the CIA under the codename MKUltra, with money from the Canadian government as well. The program would quietly be shut down in 1965. But the truth about what happened there would be protected for another decade and a half longer. Then, in 1980, we were among the first to tell Canadians about it.
The Fifth Estate.
I'm Adrienne Clarkson.
Tonight we report on a secret CIA research project carried out in Montreal in which mental patients felt they were used as the CIA's guinea pigs.
They kept you asleep for 23 days. And while I was asleep, they were shocking the heck out of me with electric shocks.
The government of Canada was even more deeply involved in the Allen Memorial experiments than the Americans.
In the 90s, the government of Canada announced its own compensation plan, but only for the most seriously injured victims, those who survived the experiments in a childlike state. The government also insisted it had no legal or moral obligation to do it. But with some digging, Elizabeth Thompson would learn the Trudeau government had prevented the victim's family from ever discussing the settlement. It is now the better part of 7 decades since the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal became that house of horrors. Today, perhaps hundreds of Canadians, survivors and family members, are still paying the price for the brainwashing experiments sponsored by the Canadian and American governments. Yet to this day, neither the U.S. nor Canada has ever said we're sorry.